Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the Public Programs and Events Manager here at the IDA, and I'm really excited for this conversation that we have for you today with ESPN's Lance. Before we get started, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I come to you today from Los Angeles, which is on the occupied lands of the Tongva and Chumash people who have been stewards of this land for generations. We'd just like to acknowledge the indigenous people on whose land we stand on today. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules. You'll see that the chat is disabled, but you can submit questions for our panel through the Q&A function down at the bottom. We will be taking 10 to 15 minutes at the end to answer some of your questions. We will bring you up on video unless you indicate in the question that you would like our moderator, Tim Grierson, to read the question for you. And this session will be recorded. We will post it on our YouTube page in the coming weeks. And if you want to check out, we still have a handful more of our conversations coming up. You can visit documentary.org and just click on Award Spotlight to see the upcoming conversations. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to our moderator, Tim Grierson, and he will welcome on our panel. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Cassidy. Thank you very much for having me. Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to moderate this panel tonight. For Lance, I would like to now introduce the four members of the team from Lance that we have here to talk about this terrific film, starting with Editor Allan Duso, and then executive producers Mike Hughes and Libby Geist. And then last but not least, the director and the producer of Lance, Marina Zenovich.
There.
Thank you all for being here. Congratulations on the film. It's a real achievement. I'm so glad to have all of you with us today. The first thing I wanted to ask was to Marina. This is obviously a ambitious endeavor, and especially figuring out how to start, what the first image of your film is going to be. I imagine it's always a bit of a challenge. Lance opens so terrifically. That story that Lance tells about sort of knowing that for years after the scandal came out, that people were going to come up to him and essentially say F you in public. And he tells that story. I was curious, first of all, when Lance told you that story, did you know that that would be the opening of the film? And then the decision to make that the opening of the film, and what you sort of wanted to establish from the beginning by having that be the opening of the film?
Well, it's a funny story because I heard him tell that story on a podcast. And I had never sat him down and said, you know, while I'm making a documentary about you, you can't talk to anyone else. Like, I didn't have, I mean, I've never been in that position to do that. But when I heard that, I was like, oh shit, like that story is amazing. And I need that story, and I need him to tell me that story on camera. So I called him at that point. I can't remember how far along we were in filming, and said like, oh my God, that story, don't ever tell that story again. That story is for this movie. That, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt it was so strong. We wanted to try to make a scene out of it. You know, we went to the bar, we talked to a bartender there. I mean, in a perfect world, as you're making something like this, you know, I wanted to find the people. Like, how would we have found the people, you know, in the Village Voice of the old days? Like, were you that person in the bar in Denver, Colorado? Anyway, we got him to tell the story. He told it with, you know, the story is in essence just him. It is just in your face, like, this is me, like, can I cuss on this? You know, it's like, and we, Alan, help me here. I mean, did we want to use that from the beginning? I knew it was.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty early on that we decided that that would be the open for that exact reason, that it's so him. And it's basically that bridge between when any of the past coverage of Lance was and when our film is really starting. And it's just like the epitome of what anyone probably thought might have happened.
Because for me, and obviously early on in the film, you have Bonnie Ford, the ESPN writer, say, he is going to try to kind of corral this project. And obviously you start the movie, that's almost one of the first things after we have Lance talk. In terms of actually working with Lance Armstrong, did you feel that pretty early on that he was going to try to corral this, that he was going to try and figure out how he could put himself in the best light in terms of being the subject of the film?
He doesn't do it in a direct way. And I think that anyone would want to be shown in the best way.
Right.
I think we put those quotes at the beginning just to let people know, like, hey, we know what you think, and we know that you think we're going to, be charmed by him, but we're in on the secret as well. So it was a constant balancing act while shooting, but also in the editing room of kind of showing him, it's two different worlds and we can break them up. But like while I was filming, he trying to kind of, here's the thing. Lance Armstrong, no matter what he's done, is incredibly charismatic. He's incredibly likable. We would walk away from those shoots going like, God, he has so much fun. I don't have enough fun in my life. Like, I'm going to have more fun in my life because he has so much fun. But then I'd come back to the editing room and Alan would be there going like, no, he's not going to charm you. Look, it's someone cut me off. I could talk about this for hours. It's a dance. It's a subtle kind of fencing match between him and me. And we had fun doing it.
Yeah.
And so I always knew he was trying to maneuver, but so was I. So that's what's intriguing about the film, I think.
I wanted to ask Libby, because if I understand correctly, you've been part of the 30 for 30 series really from the beginning. And obviously Oprah Winfrey had interviewed Lance Armstrong. Alex Gibney had done a documentary about Lance Armstrong. In terms of reaching out to Marina, but also talking to Lance that he wanted to do some sort of project like this, was there any concern initially about, has this story been told already? Can we figure out another way of telling this story?
Definitely. I think that happens with a lot of the stories that we tackle because we focus so much with 30 for 30 on historical topics that inevitably there have been pieces done or, people think they know that story. And those are actually my very favorite 30 for 30s of like, oh yeah, you think you know this story, but we're going to sort of throw you a loop a little bit. And I think the one thing about Lance, and Mike should speak to Lance coming on board as well, but, it's critical for us to catch athletes, and in our case, in a period of their life where they're ready to be really introspective, where they're sort of looking back, they're going to be open and honest. There's not a lot of strings attached, they're ready to kind of tell all. And you can tell when someone is not at that point, not quite ready, and others who are just totally nuts and, air all of their stuff. And I think the idea that he was just coming to the end of the lawsuits and obviously, he's with Marina when he's finishing that U.S. Postal Service lawsuit there. I think that for us meant, he really is now looking back. That chapter is over officially. What is this time like for him? Now we hoped that he was closing that door and walking into sort of a new phase of his life, which I was really interested in. So yes, I've seen a lot about him. I knew a lot about him. And honestly, I think for me, it was the right director too, was hugely important, is who is not just going to ask the same questions, who is not just going to see the obvious videos that I've also seen. And as you spoke to earlier, I just think the trust and the relationship that Marina built, we knew how wonderful she was from day one, which is why we called her immediately when we knew that this could be a thing. But I just think that's my favorite part of the film, Tim, as you were mentioning, is I think you can sense whether she's in the film or you can just hear her question. You can see, the way he's talking to her, that she's there and they have a dynamic and that she's really pushing him. And I love that. I think from a filmmaking standpoint, I'm not sure I've seen anything that well done and that tricky and that kind of, you know, I don't know, there was a sort of a wink and a nod throughout the whole film that I just couldn't take my eyes off of. So kudos to Marina. I think that's truly what made this unique. Yeah.
Mike, in terms of getting Lance Armstrong, what was the process? How did that kind of come about?
Yeah, it was, to Libby's point, I think it was one where it was all about timing. The initial sort of concept for it had happened. I had heard him be very honest on a podcast, and I think it was a Joe Rogan podcast. And he was, for the first time I had heard, like, speaking openly and candidly about, performance enhancing drugs and regret and just things that he had done in the past in a way that I hadn't heard before, far different from the Oprah Winfrey interview, far different from the Alex Gibney interview, frankly, that this was sort of a side of him that I had never seen. And as somebody who sort of grew up being fascinated by him and being swept up in the story, like so many of us were in the early 2000s, it just felt like at this point it was the right time to do it. So it started with sort of like asking a friend, hey, I'm thinking about Lance Armstrong. Do you know anybody that knows him? Yeah, I happen to have a friend who knows him. And it just sort of led to, I found out that he would entertain the idea, sent him a deck 24 hours later, said I could be on a plane next week. And sort of that's what happened. I think he was intrigued by the opportunity to, tell the fullness of the story and to really tell the entire scope of it. And that's really what we pitched him, it wasn't that, hey, we're going to be sympathetic to your point of view, or that this is going to be, something that may make you look bad. Like, we can't necessarily control that. But what I will tell you is we are going to tell the whole story. And that's what I think ultimately got him interested in taking it on, and being so accessible. As you can see in the film, he's interviewed and given access, over the course of a year, many, many, many times. And I think it was about just him allowing for the audience to see the completeness of his story for the first time.
Alan,
he waffled a little, didn't he, too, Mike? Oh, sorry, Tim.
No, go ahead.
There was a moment.
He go back and forth a little? Yeah.
There was a moment, and I do think, again, it was that Postal Service case was happening. He ran the risk at that point of being sued by the U.S. government for $100 million. So I don't know if there was he had sort of a clear mind. I think once that started to look like it was going to go in his favor, he was like, all right, let's move forward. But yeah, there was a couple rocky moments for sure.
Out of curiosity, for both Mike and Libby, how long was the process of that original deck and then him saying yes, if you remember? Is this weeks? Is this months? How long are we talking?
No, it was probably a year.
Okay.
Yeah. And to ESPN's credit, in that process, several members of Libby's team actually came down to Austin and met with me and Lance and a couple of the other producers on the film, because I think we were all cautious about what we kind of talked about earlier, which was, is he going to allow, us in? Is he going to tell us, the truth in a way that we would feel good putting out in front of the audience? And so we did a fair amount of vetting, and I think ultimately came to the decision that over the course of, it probably was a year, that he was ready.
So to Alan, I'm always so interested in terms of editing a documentary, because in some ways it might seem pretty straightforward. It's a biography of a person. It's a rise and fall story. There's obviously much more complexity in that. And also in terms of just figuring out the tone of the story that you're telling with Marina. I was sort of curious in terms of the challenges in telling a story, but also obviously having to sort of adhere to, there are certain plot beats that we have to have in this, in figuring out the story that the two of you wanted to tell, and also the story that needed to be told in terms of giving us a sense of this guy who started out, had so much success, has this fall from grace. How do you sort of combine those two elements?
Well, I mean, the most interesting part always for us was Lance's responses to what he had done in the past. And the most fascinating docs, I think, are always the ones that walk that line between showing both sides and having the audience actually determine what they think was right, and do they think that he was a jerk? all those different things. And by showing both sides and leading with those key events that most people remember, that was kind of the guiding through line. We also had an amazing post team, and we had an associate producer, Caitlin Hines, assistant editor Travis, that were on the project from like probably 6 months ahead of time before I got there. And so they became experts on all of the footage. So by the time I got there, I was able to kind of pick out what those key things should be. It was great.
Also for Marina, Libby already mentioned this a little bit. One of the great things about the documentary is we start to realize, oh, Marina is going to kind of push back at Lance, and it's going to be a conversation. It's not going to be just like a simple talking head sort of documentary interview. When you first started sitting down with Lance, did you sort of know that from the beginning that you were going to have to push a little bit? And I'm sort of curious, like, because I was thinking about some of the other documentaries that you've made about Robin Williams, about Richard Pryor, about Roman Polanski. For obvious reasons, you didn't have that opportunity to have that face-to-face with those subjects. This time you did. And I was sort of curious about your own comfort in pushing back against the person that you're doing this film about.
Are you kidding? I live for that.
Yeah.
Lance wanted me to interview his therapist. I mean, he was ready to go all in, and she ended up not wanting to be interviewed, but that gave me a clue as to kind of where he was willing to go. And if he was going to go there, I mean, I'll never forget when I got that call, I was like, oh my God, this is like I've won the lottery. Because you always are wanting, and most of my films haven't had the main character in them, to have like a living, breathing human, like, you know, attractive, charismatic person in front of you that you can ask anything to. And, you know, it's not like he gave me all the answers all the time. It's not like he didn't give me different answers depending on the day of the interview, you know. But for me, it's just my personality to want to engage and to push, and he let me push. And I think once he saw that I didn't really come with any kind of agenda, I had an open heart. You know, someone asked me, what was it like to interview a known liar? Like, I'm not sitting in the chair thinking, is he lying to me? Like, part of me is thinking, well, you know, I can see the twinkle in his eye, and I know he's kind of manipulative, but that's what I'm doing as well. So it was like, it was playful. And I think that's how we were able to go deeper and deeper. And the fact that we did 8 interviews over 18 months. And my cinematographer, Nick Higgins, was the one who said, you know, he's better when he exercises. Like, we've got to get him to exercise first. It didn't happen on the first shoot, but he was like, you know, I made this film about ballerinas, and like, we'd interview them before they exercise. They were horrible, but the minute they'd had that workout, so when we started doing that, it worked. And then he couldn't like say like, oh, I've got to go on a run, or I got to go play golf or whatever. So we've kind of figured it out, and we're able to get the best performance out of him.
Well, it's interesting that you use that word performance, because obviously it's not that he is acting, but there is an element as a documentary filmmaker where you want your subjects to be as candid, interesting, open, animated perhaps as possible. In terms of working, I mean, is that something that you worked with Lance about, to say, hey, your energy's sort of low, or in terms of, were there tricks that you also realized in terms of talking to him, in terms of how you phrased questions and how you prompted him, that you would get certain responses that would just play better on camera?
I think the biggest thing, and I always tell like up and coming documentary filmmakers, like the best thing you can do is listen. Like, a lot of people don't listen. So when people feel like that you are actually like literally in the active sense of listening, they open up. And so I feel like, you know, we just connected, and I'm doing whatever I can to get him to open up even more. And usually I interview someone once, and everyone else in the film I interviewed only once. But when you go back repeatedly and you figured out how to get the best, you know, get him working out. I mean, he has positive energy anyway, so he's always up. He's never low. But I don't know, am I answering your question? It's kind of like, it's just an active thing that you're just going with your gut. You're connecting eyes. He's, you know, I usually don't say much. And when I do, it means something. Otherwise, I'm just doing a lot of nodding. So he's reacting to my facial expression, which sometimes is a bit much. So then he's, you know, it's just, I say performance because it is like, I'm trained as an actor. So it is like a back and forth of reacting, you know, it's the Meisner technique, actually.
And in terms of the other subjects, because there's so many different people that you got access to talk to, did you have sort of a rhyme or reason in terms of you wanted to talk to them after talking to Lance a few times? I was sort of curious about the strategy behind, obviously availability would be part of it, but just the determination of, I want to talk to this person at this time, or I want to hold off on talking to this person until maybe later in the process.
The ones who were difficult to get took a long time, so I couldn't really think like that. I knew that I was always going to be able to, well, I hoped that I was always going to be able to go back to Lance.
Yeah.
But it was really more just scheduling and availability. I don't know, Alan, can you think of anything?
No, I mean, like, and there were so many people that didn't make the film. I mean, it was a pretty extensive list of people that you went out and interviewed. But yeah, I don't think there was an order.
Yeah, I mean, there are just so many, you know, we wanted to get his family, clearly, his fiance, his children, you know, it took a while, like the children came later once I'd kind of gained trust, and his teammates and what have you.
In terms of telling that part of the story of his former teammates, some of them are still incredibly, I mean, they're clearly not over it. They're still very angry about it. In terms of talking to them, were any of them?
Who are you thinking of who's angry?
Well, I guess I just think about this, Floyd, for instance, is somebody who definitely seems like, who is, I mean, because I think one of the first things that he says is like, you know, Lance isn't over it. And I got the impression that Floyd is not over it. That Floyd is still kind of wrestling with it in a lot of ways himself. In terms of talking to someone like Floyd, was it hard to get them to talk, or were they kind of anxious and kind of willing to kind of talk about their experience with Lance?
I think they all wanted, well, case by case. Floyd wanted to talk. Floyd, I feel, has made peace with it. I don't know if it comes across. You know, Tyler Hamilton, I think, as he says at the end of the film, like, I was mad at him for a long time, but I had to let it go. I mean, what was interesting to me in making this film was seeing the difference in personalities of people who were able to let things go and those who weren't, depending on what had happened to them. So it's all these gradations of kind of where you sit in this story about this person.
And we talked a little bit about the beginning of the film and sort of knowing, Alan also mentioned that you sort of knew that that was going to be the opening. In terms of an ending, because the Lance Armstrong story is not over yet, in terms of figuring out where is the end point for this film, I'd really love to hear, was that difficult to sort of figure it out, or do you know how the film was going to end? Him saying, I sleep fine.
For me, what interested me, and Alan could talk to the ending if you want once, but to me, like, I wanted to go behind the scenes of Oprah. I wanted to know how that decision was made. I wanted to know, like, who made it, when, why. Like, I wanted to know about the dark period. Like, was he curled up on the floor? You know, it's kind of like, I'm into all those, like, everything that got him to the point where he is today, you know, looking at me and saying, I have no problems. I can sleep at night. It's kind of like, and to me, in thinking of that, it's all like, what the other films didn't have was that, you know, they all were made, like, there were 2 films, they were made 7 years ago. I mean, this is like, he has had hours and days and weeks and weeks and weeks and months of, like, his whole life being blown up, you know, by his own doing. So to me, it was more kind of explaining all of that. And then the end, you know, I mean, you've got to end with him, right? And
visually, we decided that it's like, I don't know if it's a line that's in the film anymore, but during his dark period is what we always called it, was after Oprah and the whole collapse, that he hated riding his bike. Like he was just over riding his bike. And so
no,
running,
he said it. I got him to say it in that last interview because Alan's like, you've got to get him to say he hated riding his bike, right?
Yeah. And so just like visually, the metaphor of just him out running in the cold just felt like a good culmination of just everything that he went through, what you just watched. And endings are always hard, but yeah, I think it wrapped up basically giving him the last word on how he feels ultimately.
For Mike and Libby, the process took about a year, you were saying, to get Lance to agree to this. Once the process begins and Marina's making the film and she's interviewing him and interviewing other people, what is the job for the two of you in terms of, are you helping them hunt down subjects? Are you sort of running interference? How, during the process of making a film like Lance, how do you sort of step in? How do you sort of assist Marina?
Well, for us, it's different really with every film and every filmmaker. Some directors lean on us every day and need advice or, want people to be super involved. Others, say, here's a rough cut. I may or may not listen to your notes. Here we go. I think there's a real comfort, at least for me and our team, I think, with Marina. We'd worked with her before on the Duke Lacrosse film, the 30 for 30 years ago. And so I think because there was a pace to it, there was a lot to figure out, right? How long should this be? How open will he be? I don't think the plan initially was that she was going to get 8 sit downs with him. I think that trust was developed and that grew over time. So a lot of it for us was check-ins. I mean, certainly the trust was there. And we just needed to, if she had any issues, whether that, a lot of times it's archival, sometimes people have access issues, but I think your team, Marina, was really self-sufficient. So it was a lot more of, I'm going back down. Oh my God, he said this, or I remember getting he told me to talk to his therapist. What is this? And we were laughing about that, So this was because we trusted this team so well and we knew things were evolving in a really great way throughout. There wasn't a ton of work for us to do other than just be there to support and try to push things along, make sure we were on budget and just figure out how to get this thing on television at this length. So, fairly typical network stuff, I guess. But I think then when you get into rough cut phases, we have a back and forth and we always, in this case, I think in most notes we were in agreement and it was a fairly, I don't want to say easy process for us, but it was a much more supportive role than okay, we got to get dirty and really help this thing chug along. I mean, they really handled him in this story brilliantly throughout.
Also along those lines, because you've been part of 30 for 30 from the beginning, Libby, I'm a big sports fan as well. And so I remember when 30 for 30 began, I thought, this is really great to have all of these like great documentaries about subject matters that I remember and kind of hearing these behind the scenes stories. But even from the beginning, it was very clear that 30 for 30 was much more ambitious than just, hey, remember this story. And since you've been part of 30 for 30 from the beginning, I'd love to hear about sort of the maturation, because I imagine at the beginning probably there was some resistance, like ESPN, they don't make documentaries,
right?
So in terms of I
was just gonna say, is there an appetite for our audience to sit still for an hour, right? And obviously those hours have gone, and I think there was a lot of risk taking in the beginning, or so we thought, and I think because these aren't straight sports stories, I mean, I sort of always joke that my favorite 30 for 30s really have nothing to do with sports, which could get me in trouble, but that's okay. But I think the layers of the cultural layers of a lot of the stories that we tell are what I'm most proud of, I think. And again, less about, oh my gosh, do you remember this great game or this great player? That to me, anybody can do, right? You can see that on any network or I don't know, just easily get some talking heads to go through. But I think once you can get deep into, in this case, a character study and the impact on a sport, which I think was really important here, or on a city, or on, just talking about American culture overall. I mean, sports is the unifier, right? That's, it's so hokey to say, but sports draws every audience and it tells every story. Someone wins and loses every single day. You know, there's someone crying on the sideline every day. So again, I think for us, it's the layers. And again, whether you think you know something, we're not just going to be like, but this happened that day and an hour by hour, play by play, but there's some perspective on the historical docs that I think are important. Again, why they mattered, why are we still talking about this? Why is it worth our audience's time? And it's a lofty goal. We've done a lot of sports docs over the last 11 years, but I think we're even more careful than we've ever been in choosing topics to make sure we don't fall into that trap of just retelling a season that's strictly nostalgic or kind of a fun watch, but something that teaches people something. And it's really hard, you know, after all these years, but makes the job harder, but you just have to work a little bit harder. And I really believe what I said earlier, that the right filmmaker and the right story is hugely important. And we're lucky. I always joke, like, I cannot believe who answers my phone calls. You know, it's like shocking to us, but we're lucky after these years of success that people want to continue telling these stories, and they all have different perspectives. And that's what keeps us on our toes, I think.
Marina, Libby sort of talked about this a little bit, but this idea, and I think it's absolutely true, that the best 30 for 30s are about something sort of thematic or cultural. When you're starting a project like this, I imagine that you don't necessarily maybe think so broadly because you sort of want to see what the subject's going to be. But you had mentioned earlier in our conversation about, in some ways, what you learned is how some people can let things go and other people cannot let things go. But in terms of other themes that sort of developed as you were doing the interviews and working with Allan to compile all of this, in terms of what this story is about for you as the filmmaker, I'm just really kind of curious to hear what you think.
Oh gosh. I mean, to me, it was really an exploration of a man, a very complicated man, and really trying to understand how he became so hated, so loved, so inspiring to people. I mean, I guess that's why I was so excited when he wanted me to talk to his therapist, because I've been doing this long enough that, like, I don't skim surfaces. I go super, super deep. And like, I felt like he was willing to go there. And so for me, I don't know, you guys can talk about what it is. It's like, I hear from other people what they think it is. I just know what I'm going for instinctually and what I like, and it's depth and to expose oneself, you know? I feel that Lance, what I love about Lance is that he is just so ultimately himself. He just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
And there is something beautiful in that.
Yeah.
And so whether I like him or don't like him, or if he's a pain in the ass or not, or a great athlete or an asshole, I love exploring all of that, and am thrilled that I was the lucky one who was able to do that. So
Well, also just from watching the film, it definitely does not seem like that is an act. That he is, the genuineness that he projects in the film, that is who he is. And yeah, it's just like you can sense
Totally.
a person being genuine in that way. You can just sense it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think,
go ahead.
and I think that's an important, like, you know, one of the goals and one of the things we talked about, you know, as a team a 1,000 times as this was going on, was like, we really wanted to put the audience in the position to like make up their own mind. You know, that at the end of the day, whether you hated him back in the day or liked him back in the day, like, you were going to get all the information, you were going to see him sort of take you through it. And then ultimately you get to decide, you get to choose whether or not you absolve him for lying because of the charitable work he was able to do for cancer research, or, you know, any of the sort of complex issues that are at the heart of his story. You know, we wanted to give everybody the opportunity to ultimately make up their own mind. And, you know, that's what I think was the biggest takeaway. That's what I feel like most people have responded to, at least when I've discussed it since then. It's man, I don't know. I thought this before, now I think this. Like, they're just intrigued by that conversation. And, you know, there's not a clear-cut answer on how to come to the right conclusion there. And I think that's what makes it so interesting.
We have some questions actually from our audience that I would love to have people ask a couple questions. And our first question is from Jordana Glick-Vransheim.
Potentially.
Tim, I think we're just going to have you read the question for her since it doesn't seem to come up. Or I can just say it right here. So
no problem.
Jordana was interested. She said, Marina, you're not a sports, you're a documentarian. So how was it to do a film that had a lot of sports in the story?
I don't think it has a lot of sports in it, but I kind of got, once I made the Duke lacrosse film in 2016, I was like, oh my God, there's so many stories in sports. Like I somehow had missed that. And so I just look at it as a psychological portrait, but I was fascinated by, or just really curious about cycling and fascinated by all the characters and how they came to cycling. And I really wanted to show that it was a European sport and kind of show how I was always pushing, like I wanted to show how the Americans were viewed by the Europeans. So it's, yeah, there she is.
So our second question comes from Anita Rao Keach. I'm not sure if Anita is there to ask her question herself, or we're going to ask it for her.
Anita, there's a lovely drawing of you, but we don't hear you.
Okay, well, she declined the video, so I will ask for her.
I get it. I get it. Believe me,
yeah.
I too. In the video too.
Totally.
Her question is, how much did you all know about the sport of bike racing and the prevalent and widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs before you started this film?
Mike, Alan, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think the context of it was really important to Lance's story. I think it was always sort of like this widely held belief that everybody was doing it, and that was always sort of thrown around, even when, you know, Lance was sort of being brought down by the establishment. And I think it was important to show that not only was it incredibly prevalent just during and prior to Lance, but it was actually even dated back many years even before that since the beginning of, you know, this race that was so difficult and so demanding, that athletes were doing anything from, you know, I heard a story about a cyclist who would tie fishing line to the bike in front of him and then hold on to a wine cork in his mouth and be dragged by the bike in front of him. That all the way to like using cocaine on a race day were ways that people did it. So I think it was important to add in that context and to really sort of establish the landscape of what was going on in the sport.
I think it was important to interview people who had doped, those who didn't and felt that they missed out because of those who doped. I knew about this story really because Alex Gibney is a friend and mentor, and I had kind of followed him through his journey with his making of the Lance film, which was basically, he was making a film about Lance's comeback, and then he had to change the film because Lance came out. So
Anita, thank you for the question. I want to thank Alan and Libby and Mike and Marina for being here today and talking about Lance. This is a really impressive achievement that you all pulled off. So thank you very much for talking about it. It's been great to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thanks,
Tim. Thanks,
Thank
IDA.
And thank you, Tim. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.